It's go time.
Welcome to the Third Down Gamble podcast with your hosts, Don Charbin and Heath Graham.
Wherever you are, I hope you enjoyed the Olympics, and now we're getting closer and closer to football. But there's something a little disconcerting happening at McMahon Stadium. Now we're recording on a Monday night, first Monday in March of 2026. Right now, I've been following on Twitter and Instagram and a few other places where people have been driving along the roadway nearest McMahon Stadium in Calgary, and there was a fire by gate 2, I think it is.
There was. It looks like it was relatively minor. Now, any fire needs to be taken seriously, and emergency crews were on the scene and put it out. But it does appear there was a pretty good blaze going by gate 2 there for a little while, and no real news yet as to what the cause of the fire was. But something we'll continue to monitor, especially since the Stamps are due to host the 2026 Grey Cup.
If you've ever been to Calgary, the C train is about half a block to the east of that roadway as well. That's the east side of the stadium, and there's a little sort of canopy that sits out front. That seems to have been the place that took the most hit from the fire, judging from the video that I've seen on Twitter and Instagram. It seems as though, to me, it seems weird that it happened in that spot because that's almost external to the stadium. And I do wonder if something else was at play here, not necessarily malicious, but just something, because it doesn't seem to be, if my recollection is correct, of being to the stadium a few times and going past there, that there's any electrical there.
There may be a storage area in that particular spot as well. So again, we don't want to speculate and say it was electrical, lightning, arson, anything, because we don't know. But with a storage area, sometimes flammable things are kept in places they shouldn't be. And again, fortunately, it looks like fairly minor damage. And as it's outside of the stadium, no real structural concerns. But it has to be a scary thought when members of that organization get the call that possibly their stadium is on fire.
We've seen it with English football. I think Blackpool is the most famous incident. And that was such a scary and tragic moment during a game, actually, at that time. This one here, non-game day, obviously, but the offices of the Stampeders, if I can give you a quick picture, they're to the left of where that fire was, if you're facing it from the street. And that's where the ticket office is. That's where the corporate offices are. That's if you're phoning the Stamps and getting to the Stamp store, that's where that is as well. So it's all tucked in that area just by where that fire was. So there were probably people nearby that could have been impacted negatively, but somebody obviously got on it quickly and they controlled it, which is fantastic. And let's give credit to the Calgary Fire Department.
The latest update I've seen, the fire started around 7 p.m. last night. Crews were already working on extinguishing the fire by 7:08, and the crew had cleared out by 7:47 p.m. So about 45 minutes roughly from the time it was first reported to the time that the fire department left the scene. Definitely a great response by those emergency services to make sure things were under control and safe, and they happened to get everything sorted out very quickly.
Or let's turn our gaze down to the UFL, where the UFL is introducing some interesting, I would say minimally, and we'll see how this plays out, maximally, changes to their regular play in the game. And that's the biggest one, I will say, is twofold, which is pretty much what they're advocating. One is awarding 4 points for a field goal of at least 60 yards. So in the confines of an American stadium, midfield is the 50, the goalposts are 10 yards back. So any kick 50 yards and out from the goal line is 60 yards or more, and that would be a 4-point field goal. What do you think of that idea?
I'm not crazy about it. Now, I know sometimes there's shock value to any change, and we could look in the rearview mirror to what happened with the CFL when Commissioner Stu Johnson proposed some upcoming changes. and the reactions. This one, to me, though, you are changing the scoring on the field. And if I circle back to the CFL changes, there was talk about maybe the Rouge being eliminated on a missed field goal in the last 3 minutes of a game, something along those lines. And that to me was taking away, if it's a scoring play in minute 3, it's a scoring play in minute 58. That shouldn't matter. This is something similar. I see the need of the 3-point line in basketball when they brought that in. I just don't see the need for it or why it would make sense in professional football, especially when you've got a touchdown worth 6 plus converts. Now you're increasing the value of a field goal against those 6 points.
Precisely. And what do you want out of a football game? Do you want to have it with teams sort of lining up at midfield and not moving anywhere and just trying 4-pointers from beyond midfield? Is that what your end game is? The 3-point line, some have argued, and I'm kind of in that camp, that it has kind of destroyed the professional game because everyone camps out around that 3-point line. And where when it was first introduced in the ABA, it was 25 feet from the basket. It shrunk down to 23.9 at the top and 22 in the corners in the NBA. Those shots are very makeable given the skill of the athletes, and it's just turned the game into a 3-point shooting contest. And the big men, or the big women in the middle, just aren't being used anymore.
It took 40 years to get to that point, though, from when the 3-point line was first introduced. And it took a couple of pretty special players to make that change.
I would say more than a couple. I obviously you're pointing to Steph Curry, and he's just a phenom. But there were a lot of others that had high percentages. You can go back to the early 90s, actually, and see players back then doing it well. Reggie Miller being one of them.
Reggie Miller, Ray Allen is another one. A big part of it was the analytics, and you start looking at those percentages to compare it to professional football. When is the right time to go for a 2-point conversion? Now, Derek Taylor, who's a friend of the podcast, often argues that every time is a good time to go for a 2-point convert after a touchdown based on the success rate versus the success rate of a 1-point play. You're not really losing anything by going for 2. I believe that's kind of what happened in basketball with the 3-point play of the value of taking that shot based on the percentage made. And this transcends across all sports. You can look at baseball. Now, I would argue that analytics have ruined baseball more so than 3-point shooting has ruined the NBA, where it seems like a guy gets on first base now and he just stands on the bag and waits for the next guy to pound one over the fence. And that to me takes away the excitement of stretching a double into a triple, hit and run, stolen bases, and squeeze plays. So there's a lot more nuance to a game, and you take away from that when you're just looking specifically at the power angle. This 4-point field goal line is also just the power game and takes some of the nuance away.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I will argue it's not so much analytics that killed baseball in terms of home runs. It was the idea that we've got to bring the fences in, because back in the day, and I'm talking maybe as far back as the 1950s, early 60s, those fences were easily 450 to 500 feet straight away, and then 390 to 370 in the corners. Other than pesky pole in Boston, beyond that, the stadiums were large, and so you had to play small ball. You had, as Yogi Berra said, hit them where they ain't. And that's what you had to do. Nowadays, you just get the big guys up there and they slug for the fences, and that's it. And oh yeah, great home run, maybe turns the tide of a game, excitement for 15 seconds, but there's no drama. Other than maybe the pitcher versus the hitter, there's no other drama. There's nobody leading off third base, threatening to steal home, things like that. Kansas City Royals, I think, were the last team that played small ball to win a World Series.
They were. And like I said, you can look at changes in every sport, and some of them have been good. Some of them have been bad. I would argue the pitch clock in baseball has made it a lot more palatable to watch than watching a pitcher wander around between the mound and second base for 25 seconds before even attempting to read a signal from a catcher. I don't fault the UFL for trying some different initiatives. Some of these may be successful, some of them won't. We're seeing even the NFL adapting some kicking rules that were tried out first in the XFL. Kick return, I'm talking like the change of possession kick return game where the players line up and they're frozen until the kick returner catches the ball. I'm not a huge fan of that one either. I understand part of why they brought that in. It does add a different wrinkle, and it's too early to tell until we see the gameplay. Much like the CFL changes, there's a lot of hand-wringing right now, but we don't know until we see games on the field.
Well, the CFL, we won't really know most of it until 2027. Now, the single will change in 2026, but that's with the current end zone. So we'll get a taste of it, I guess, if you want to argue that. The 4-point field goal, I think, like, what do you do if you're at the 41-yard line and it's third down? Do you take a knee and go back 4 yards so you can try a 61-yarder as opposed to a 58-yarder? Is that how we play it out? How many times is that going to happen? I mean, coaches aren't dumb. If they want an extra point, they'll just drop 3 more yards. It really begs the question, like, at what point does this start to take away, let alone the fact, as you initially pointed out, that it's now worth over half of a typical 7-point touchdown, 6-1.
It is, and there's no reason even for a team to take a knee to back it up. They could just snap the ball further. There's no stipulation on where they spot it on a field goal attempt. It's generally 7 or 8 yards behind the line of scrimmage, but teams could practice a 10 or 11 yard snap to get that. So it's a weird little wrinkle that, as I said, I'm not really a fan of. One thing they're doing to kind of combat that is they are giving teams now 3 options on a convert. They can do the traditional 1-point kicking convert. They could go for 2 from the 3-yard line, or they could go for a 3-point convert from the 8-yard line. Again, it's a bit gimmicky in my mind. It gives them some options. So now you could potentially have a 9-point touchdown and a 4-point field goal.
To me, it's going the wrong way when you start addressing scoring this way by figuring out different ways to add to converts and add to field goals. The problem is you're not getting enough touchdowns in the first place. So what is happening in your game that teams are not scoring touchdowns? That's what you have to look at. And you talk to Steve Daniel from the CFL stats department. What does he say over and over and over again? Illegal contact. Once they eliminated contact beyond 5 yards of that line of scrimmage, the whole playing field started to open up. And he thought that and blocking on kick returns were 2 of the biggest rule changes that the CFL took upon themselves. Well, that's addressing how to score touchdowns. That's not addressing gimmicks, as you correctly pointed out, to score an extra point here or there.
One other rule change that I believe the CFL, now correct me, you're more of the rules guru than I am, but the UFL is looking to ban the tush push, which technically is already illegal in Canadian football as far as assisting a player from behind. Now, we've seen scrums develop on the field where it's questionable where the ball carrier is in relation to their blockers in the CFL. But the NFL, famously the Philadelphia Eagles, have perfected the play on short yardage. The UFL is taking action to try to eliminate that.
In the Canadian Football League, it's illegal to carry the ball carrier, but you can push the ball carrier as much as you want. We saw that in the East semifinal with the Montreal Alouettes pushing for a touchdown. They literally pushed the ball carrier into the end zone, and that does happen a lot. We don't necessarily have the tush push in the CFL yet. I don't know it's at a point where they're considering maybe making it legal or not, or whatever the case may be. But technically under CFL rules, I can propel my runner. And you see a lot of time with offensive line, when the running back gets stalled down the field, they come barging down to give that pile a big push to move it further along. If the UFL decides that this is not what they want and it's not a good look, and I don't think it's a good look for the NFL either, to be quite honest, the CFL may follow suit and say, yeah, we don't want that either, because it's not that it's illegal but it's just not a good look.
We've already talked about the lack of creativity on short yardage plays now, where you bring in your short yardage specialist ball carrier to essentially fall forward. Adding somebody in behind them to give them a shove forward, again, does not make this any more exciting. I like the creativity. I like when they used to line a running back up directly behind the quarterback. They come flying either into or trying to get over the line of scrimmage and into the end zone or to get that first down. So many more options. And I'm not trying to say anything negative towards the people that have perfected short yardage. They've done their job. But I think it's the job of the league to look at ways to keep this game engaging and exciting. And the tush push is not one of those plays.
It's not a rules thing. It's an optics thing. The NFL has to address this at some level at some time. And the CFL may be watching to see what they decide to ultimately do. In the CFL, we do have the designated third down quarterback. You can go around the league and you can see, and for Shea Patterson, it worked out, unfortunately, very poorly for him in the Grey Cup. But for the most part, when you look at Tommy Stevens, people like him, they've made a career. And Cody Fajardo, that's how he started. Before he got to be a starting quarterback, he paid his dues on third down gambles. That's the type of person that they're looking for. Big, strong, and can hang on to the football and move forward. I would like to see that end. I would like to see a rule where whatever you brought out on second down, that's what you got to go with on third down at quarterback.
That would be an interesting one. Or if they make the first down, that quarterback has to stay in play.
Yeah, like baseball, you have to face three pitchers. That would be an interesting way to do it until you have to come in for three plays if you bring him in for one.
No, Winnipeg experimented with that a little bit. They would often keep Chris Drevler out after short yardage situations on first down to give the defense something else to think about, a different wrinkle to it. They wouldn't keep him out for an entire series. It was usually a first down play, see what happens, and then Zach Collaros would come trotting back out onto the field. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but you better make darn sure that your short yardage quarterback is capable of running an offense and not just a single specialized play.
And then it begs the question, why are you paying Zach Collaros $750,000 just to stand on the sideline? If you're throwing that kind of money around, or Nathan Rourke, anybody like that, you're tossing that money their way, they better be out there and be playing for you. And Zach Collaros in the Grey Cup, if you watched that pregame show and even the postgame show, how he hates, not Chris Strevler, but hates being on the sideline when big moments arise and it's a third and. The other part of the equation in this UFL that they're introducing, which is something that you and I have talked about, I've talked about with Steve Daniel, the whole business of punting. And what do you do when you're inside, and especially deep inside the other team's field? At what point do you say, okay, we can't punt anymore? We've got to continue to either play for the field goal or go for a touchdown. Well, the UFL is almost taking that decision away from the coaches.
What they are proposing or implementing is if you're on the other team's side of the 50-yard line, punting is no longer an option. Again, I like teams to have options. I don't like them taking this one away. And I think back to the Labor Day game in Regina last year where Trevor Harris pulled off a surprise punt against Winnipeg. And it was an exciting, now granted, it was also a third down play. They lined up like they were going to go for it. It was going to be a third down gamble, and he punted instead and pinned the Bombers well inside the 5-yard line. He pulled off an excellent and surprise play to get the Winnipeg Blue Bombers pinned deep. I like to have those kinds of quirks. I love the punting game in the CFL. I love the fact that if a punter is heads up enough, he can hustle down the field and recover his own kick, which we don't see often on long punts anymore, but it does still happen from time to time. Creates a lot more drama. And I understand, I guess, where the UFL is coming from and trying to encourage more gambles. I just don't think this is the right way to go about it. I'm finding myself agreeing with you again. I don't see what the rationale is, but the NFL and
and especially American college, whatever, the UFL, they have a different attitude about punting in the first place. After all, they have fair catches, all that kind of stuff that we don't see in the CFL. It's a live ball once that ball is kicked. It's a dribbled ball in one context, but it's a live ball in another context. That means once that defender has touched it, all bets are off, and you better decide what you want to do with it. I'm with you on this because the quick kick, which is what you're referring to, is not going to be available anymore unless they decide that the quick kick is tolerable and that you try to change it up by having the quarterback punt the ball. But a designed punt seems to be ixnay. Whether that's a great idea? Nah, I don't think so. Because what's the end game about this? You're trying to force teams to do what?
You're trying to get teams to go for it, which would result in first downs and eventually more touchdowns. But you're also looking at the field of play and a turnover on downs. Now, I believe what they're looking at is not necessarily getting the ball from the previous line of scrimmage.
Under the new rule, if your scrimmage line is inside the 50, you cannot punt it in the UFL. You've got to either go for it or try a field goal, which then begs the question, why is there a 4-point field goal? Well, maybe this is part to answer. Rather than having a punt, let's have them try 60-yard plus field goals instead. Wouldn't that be more exciting? Which, again, I'm doing a lot of meh so far in this podcast, but I just don't get it. You go to games to see big plays, to see exciting plays, to see big catches, big runs, plays that take the ball down the field quickly, explosive plays, as they call it in the CFL, 30-yard plus. Those are the types of things that get you off your feet, get you excited. Field goals don't get you off your feet and get you excited. I can't remember, other than a last play game-winning field goal, ever getting onto my feet for a field goal try.
This also brings into play the field position. If you're almost forced to gamble and you don't get that successful yardage, you've now turned the ball over to the other team with a very short field going back the other way. And it's going to be the norm because you're not allowed to punt the ball away. It's too manipulative to gameplay and decisions. I'm all for making coaches make difficult decisions, but this one really can change the outcome of the game by saying you're not allowed to do this play that you can actually do for half of the field. We're just taking away half of the field from you being able to do it.
Exactly. It's one of those things, I guess, if you want to ask the question and you're the UFL, go for it, because you're looking to generate audience numbers, because you're struggling at the gate and you're struggling on television. So one of the two things that you're trying here is to give 4 points for super long field goals or no more punting, which then begs the question, again, if you're at the 40-yard line and it's 3rd down and 12, take an offside penalty, go back 5, kneel on the ball and punt it, or try a field goal from 62. I would love to see how many times teams back up to try a 4-point field goal. I think it's going to be more than people expect.
It puts them in a position to manipulate the game too much.
Again, what's the point of football? Is it to kick field goals from 60 yards away, or is it to score touchdowns? And if fundamentally you have a problem answering that question, then I don't know that you've really thought about it enough, because the game started with the premise of, in rugby, of scoring a try. That was what you wanted to do, was score a try. Those were always valuated so much more than anything else you could do by kicking. Now you're valuating kicking over scoring a touchdown or a try. It seems to be backwards. Like, you should be finding out ways to make offenses succeed, whether that's they did one really bright thing, which the CFL's done forever, 1 foot inbounds to catch a football, and that's considered a legal catch. Great move there. That should help. Why not just leave it at that?
Former CFL quarterback Henry Burris is looking at opportunities in both coaching and media after his stint with Florida A&M University came to an end last month. He's trying to decide what is best for him and his family, and it's going to be fun to watch to see what is next for Henry Burris.
I hope he winds up in the CFL. He's got a pretty big following in the league. Of course, he won Grey Cups with Calgary and with Ottawa, and especially that Ottawa game in dramatic fashion in overtime. If he's looking at opportunities, I think the better place for him, and given that he lived in Calgary for so long, it would be nice to go home and see if he could land somewhere in the CFL and at least have Calgary as his base once again.
I'm sure many CFL fans would love to see him back involved in the Canadian League in some regard. He has had a pretty successful run through U.S. college ball in different roles as coach and coordinator as well, but he understands the Canadian game. He excelled at the Canadian game, and I think he could bring a lot to help nurture that next generation of talent in the CFL.
And whether or not he wants to be a part of broadcasting, he could certainly do that as well. He would be probably very adept at doing that. The problem is, I think there's a guy that's quarterbacking in Hamilton that's probably ahead of him in line to take over in some capacity, whether it's on the panel or doing the color commentary on broadcasts.
There's also a pretty well-established color crew doing broadcasts right now, so it just questions arise as to how long some of those guys want to continue doing what they're doing, how long the broadcast partners want to continue having them do what they're currently doing as well. And broadcast rights are going to be up for negotiation here very shortly. So maybe we see an expansion of broadcast partners, and there is more demand for on-air talent with some former players providing color.
I would love it if, not that I'm saying that TSN's doing a poor job, but I would love it that somebody else gets involved with the league, CBC, Rogers, whomever, and picks up a certain broadcast night, whether it's Friday nights, whether it's Saturday afternoons, whatever the case is that they agree upon. I think that would be good for the league, and it would create competition between the networks to who's providing more for the audience with their package. When CFL was on both CTV and CBC, they both had a different approach to how they presented the game. And you got the benefit of both worlds, and you had great announcers on both sides. You had Don Chevrier, who had some classic calls, 1976 Grey Cup for one, who anchored CBC's coverage of the CFL through the 60s and the 70s. You had Don Whitman, who was with the CFL broadcast on CBC for 4 decades. You had, on the flip side, Dale Isaacs, who took over for CTV at one point, but you also had John Wells. You had a lot of different personalities that really you could identify with. And then, of course, you had the color commentators to go with too. So as you're saying, you broaden the field. And I think you would just bring more to the game. If you have competition for that, somebody might be innovative in how they do it, and the other network might go, holy cow, that's really good.
And not just the on-air broadcast talent, but the way the game is displayed as well. You've got the score bug. I remember watching Hockey Night in Canada as a kid, and if you walked in halfway through a period, it took sometimes 10 minutes to find out what the score was until they announced it. And now you've got the score bug in the corner giving you lots of information. You've got things along the bottom showing you what down, how many timeouts remaining. The first down line was an innovation. The first network that broadcast that, other networks had to catch up quickly because they realized what a great innovation that was, and how much it changed the way the average fan watched the game and could see specifically what that target was. And so all of these things continue to evolve, and if you don't have that other network pushing, sometimes things can stagnate a little bit.
Well, the infancy of the first down line and the scrimmage line was developed in Canada. That was a Canadian innovation. There's you've got the spider cam that we now see. We're getting way off topic from Henry Burris and where he may land. I think it would be for especially of a certain generation that watched this game. Henry Burris is synonymous with this league. And whether it's Hank or Henry, if that's coming out of the stands and he's coaching on the other sideline, I think it would just create some more fun and engagement at games if Henry Burris was back, because he is a big personality.
Hey, it's Dave Thomas, voice of your Saskatchewan Roughriders, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble Podcast.
If you were watching the NFL Network on the weekend, you would have seen the NFL Scouting Combine from Indianapolis. A lot of what you'll see in the CFL Combine that's coming up in March, and there's some preparatory ones that are building toward it, you'll see a lot of the same activities being brought forward to the players for the players to participate with. Sometimes you kind of wonder, well, what's the rationale behind this, and why is it so beneficial to understand this? But the CFL has actually come out with a presser, pardon the pun, as we work with weightlifting. The league has given some hints and tips as to what they're looking for when they ask the players to do certain activities.
They are. So you mentioned weightlifting. We'll start with that one, the bench press. And this is really a test for upper body strength and balance. And bench press is pretty straightforward. They're lying on their back on a bench, pushing weight up 225 pounds. How many reps can they do? So obviously it focuses on upper body strength, but the balance part of it is an interesting wrinkle that the scouts are looking for as well.
And next up is cone drill, which we saw a lot of at the NFL evaluation, but it's really about agility. It's about the change of direction, the balance, and the ability to get up to speed quickly and to make quick turns. And the equipment is basically those orange cones that you see, and the players have to basically do the circuit. And if you knock over a cone or you improperly run the drill, well, then you only get 2 attempts at this. And if you do it once, you're okay. There was something said at the NFL Combine that I thought was really fascinating. They're evaluating on whether or not you're listening to what you're being told. Did you get how I wanted you to do this? And are you following through when your turn comes up? And that's coachability.
It is very interesting to watch these combines because you look at the drills that these players are going through, and a lot of them don't look like what you would typically see on a football field necessarily, but you start breaking down the why behind it. And that 3-cone drill, the ability to get up to speed quickly, is something that you don't necessarily think about when watching the game, but that explosiveness, be it a defensive lineman getting around the edge and coming after the quarterback, a receiver running a post pattern, a running back bursting through the line, they need to get to that maximum speed as quickly as possible. And this is a great indicator of how well they can do that.
Well, let's look at linebackers or defensive halves where motion of the offense is taking you to your right, and all of a sudden they've tossed the ball to the left. And now you got to stop on a dime and get on your horse and start riding back towards where that running back is or receiver is. That's the type of measurability that they want in this.
The next one's pretty straightforward, and pun intended here as well. It's the 40-yard dash. It's how fast you can get from standing still to across the finish line 40 yards straight ahead of you. Obviously, looking at quickness, pure speed, and explosiveness in this one. The combine is amazing because there are some awfully big men out there that can move down that 40-yard track at speeds that you could not believe.
Honestly, like if I was doing a 40-yard dash in my shape right now, they would be measuring it with a calendar, not a stopwatch. These guys are putting down 4.6s, 4.45s, 4.4s, 4.35s. These are blindingly fast. And what the CFL also does is they measure their time at 10 and 20 as on their way to the 40 yards, so that it's all quickness out of the block, up to speed, and then sustainability as you just go through and run to the end.
When you get beyond that 40 yards, when world-class sprinters running the 100 meters, it's more about how quickly they get to that top speed, which is in that kind of first 40 yards. Beyond that, it's how well they can maintain the speed. They're not still accelerating at 80, 90, 100 yards across the finish line. They're maintaining that momentum that they built up in the first half of the race. These guys are on pace with some world-class sprinters a lot of times, and how quickly they can get up to that speed.
Well, Usain Bolt, the biggest problem that he had was getting out of the blocks quickly, given the size of his body and how long his legs were. And once you develop that quick twitch, that ability to make that first step, He ran the 100 meters in one less step than everybody around him. And had he not celebrated early all the time, slowing down, he could have had records that we never would touch.
Next is the 20-yard short shuttle, and this one is basically running lines laterally. I remember doing these in basketball practices in school as well, and they can be exhausting. It's going from a center point, running sideways 5 yards, touching a line, going all the way across the middle point to the other line and back as quickly as you can. Lateral quickness, obviously, and stop-start ability.
And again, it really comes down to, I think, your ability as a linebacker, a defensive back, most likely running backs as well, where you've got to be able to stop on a dime, gather your momentum, and take it back the other way. And the ones that do it really well leave somebody in the dust if you're on offense, or make the tackle if you're on defense. These are the types of things that they need to sort of assess to know, do you fall within a certain measure that will be a complement to our defense?
Another one that's pretty straightforward is the vertical leap, how high you can jump off the ground and what you can touch at the top. Now, this is one that somebody like Willie Jefferson with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers excels at. He's already a giant frame at 6'7" tall, and he can also leap. This is why the guy leads the league in pass knockdowns time and again. And that ability is what they're looking for. Or if you're a receiver or a defensive back, how high can you jump to high point on those toss-up 50-50 footballs? Are you going to out-jump everybody else and come down with it?
And that's what they want to know. They want to know, is there the ability to make the get? And then once you're up there, how much is the will and determination? But they'll figure that out with a later drill. Willie Jefferson, yes, 6'7", he can definitely get high. But what if a guy 6'1" out-jumps him and gets to a higher point? That tells you a lot about the guy that's 6'1", that's out-jumping Willie Jefferson. And those are the types of measurables they want to see, because that type of activity is a lot of it about your agility and vertical power, but it's also about want.
The final one is the broad or standing long jump. I remember these ones from elementary school field days as well. This could be a tough one if you're not prepared for it, just basically standing still and how far you can jump forward. The vertical comes into play a lot in this as well. If you've got a good vertical, you've got that explosiveness to jump forward. And this is looking for body control and explosiveness and how well you can adapt to now moving forward as opposed to straight up.
Key is body control in this one, because you have to go from nothing to explosion to stop. And you don't want to be falling forward or falling backward. You want to be under control throughout the whole process. Now, the one thing that the CFL does that the NFL Combine does not do is have a scrimmage on the final day. And that's one aspect of the CFL Combine that I think is fantastic, because now you're putting the helmet on, you're strapping on some pads. You're not really tackling or anything like that, but formation, reaction time, who's the leader out there, who's making the reads, those types of things become very, very evident.
And you talked about the ability, the coachability and following direction earlier on with some of the cone drills. This is a prime example of that as well. They don't have a lot of time to learn complex plays. They're going to get some quick direction, go to the line, snap the ball, and you better have been paying attention.
One other one that they do in the CFL that they do not in the NFL, and that's offensive line versus defensive line, one-on-one, and there's a tackle dummy behind the offensive line player, and you've got to defend against that. You can't hold, you got to have good technique. And again, that's will, want, strength, quickness.
We can keep an eye on the numbers some of these guys put up in the NFL camp and see where they fall. Some of these guys may continue to go undrafted and be eligible to sign CFL contracts down the line.
Now, speaking of which, Taylor Elgersma, there was so much hoopla made about the fact that he was invited to the scouting combine. I watched quite a few hours of it. I never saw him.
He didn't participate in any of these drills that we've just kind of gone through. He came as a throwing quarterback. A lot of it was more to evaluate the receivers and running backs than it was the quarterbacks in those situations. But he was there showing his accuracy, his arm strength, and his ability to throw to routes. That's hoping to catch the eye of people. Now, he's not draft eligible. He wasn't going through the same testing and evaluation as these draft eligible quarterbacks were. It was an opportunity for him to let people have another look.
Which makes sense. But if I'm Taylor Elgersma, I'm looking at this situation and I'm seeing another pool of 20 to 30 quarterbacks that have just come out of college, some of them that are a lot bigger and a lot quicker than I am. And suddenly my value has dropped and I'm staring at them and seeing what's happening in the NFL next year. Do I fit in? Where do I fit in?
That's a great point. And you have to think, because he's not draft eligible, he didn't stick with a team in the 2025-26 season. That's a harder climb for him. We know teams take a lot of initiative and throw a lot of resources towards quarterbacks that they draft and develop. They don't want to look like fools on draft day. They want that guy that they pick in the first or second round to become a successful starter with their franchise.
And it's who you know in the NFL. There's so much of who you know. And if you're invested in a quarterback that you saw in college, that you've had some rapport with, and now it's draft day, and you've got a choice between going with a running back or a linebacker or picking this quarterback that you spent some time with, and maybe instead saying, let's go linebacker and we'll bring Elgersma into camp. Which do you think you're going to do?
You're looking at your draft pick for sure.
Third down.
Players in new places. A.J. Allen left the Saskatchewan Roughriders for the Ottawa Redblacks. And there was an interesting story with him discussing this move on 3 Down Nation, where he basically felt that the Roughriders were moving in a different direction and he wasn't a part of it.
A bit surprising to see, given the success that A.J. Allen and the Saskatchewan Roughriders had when they were partners in this. He's only 27 years old. There's a lot more left in the tank for A.J. Allen. And this was, again, some of the guests that we've talked to, this was one of the biggest surprises and one of the biggest losses for the Riders.
And I don't know what happened that he wouldn't be a part of the future unless the dollar value wasn't going to fit. And we don't get that from this story. But he says he's disappointed by what happened. It's frustrating and can be aggravating. He said, it's a business world, and sometimes business can be ugly. And that's his own words on 3 Down Nation. I just think when you got a ratio breaker, he's from Burlington, Ontario, why would you necessarily leave him behind or out of the equation? I don't quite get it.
This is such an intricate dance, and we've talked about this every year in free agency, the tough decisions that teams have to make. There's always one side that's disappointed in these transactions. And you know, you can talk about Winnipeg and running back Andrew Harris, how he felt he was treated leaving that camp. We've got Marc-Antoine Dequoy this year that Danny Machocha had questioned whether or not they had a place for him. He ends up retiring. I would not want to be in the shoes of the management team that has to make some of these tough decisions, especially with key guys. That cap management has become so important in the CFL. Yes, we're seeing increased salary cap, so there is a bit more money available, but you have to decide where and how you want to spend those dollars.
Him and CJ Rivas, they were the two guys that I thought were on the upside of their growth in the CFL, and the Riders had them both. Well, now they're both playing for Ottawa. If you're Jeremy O'Day, you have to accept that there's going to be losses, but they took 4 hits on defense. That's 1/3 of your starting lineup, basically, is now playing somewhere else. That's a large hole to fill. I know they wanted to spend more money on receivers. It's just tough when you have to make these decisions. I'm not faulting them for it, but I am questioning, could you have not found room somehow?
That's the big question. And you talk about the receiving core. There were some opportunities there to move things around a little bit. I believe that the 2 key receivers that left, and Joe Robustelli and Tommy Neild, they weren't the flashiest guys. They chose to re-sign Keon Schaefer-Baker, who's had some injury trouble. If you wanted to look at Canadian receiver and save yourself a little bit of money, would Neal have been the better choice? Would that have freed up more space to maybe bring AJ Allen back into the fold?
That's a great question, and one we'll never really find out. General managers at the best of times do not go out with a report card and say, this is why this happened. They keep it to their best, and that's out of respect for the player as well. They will never say anything disparaging about a player that maybe they're deciding they want to move on.
Continuing on with the Rough Riders, backup quarterback Jake Maier has moved on also to the Ottawa Red Blacks, essentially signing for about $35,000 more in hard money than the Rough Riders were able to offer him. He was very forthcoming in this, that it was a monetary decision that was a big push in him moving on. The Riders were transparent with him. This was what we can offer you. He found opportunity elsewhere with Ryan Dinwiddie and that Red Blacks team.
It's interesting that you mentioned that $35,000 value, because you have recounted several times on this podcast how the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were able to convince their veterans, their star players, take a little less, make it up in playoff money.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest part of keeping that core Bombers team together and successful for so long. Perhaps Jake Maier is also looking at playing opportunity and what happens in Ottawa. Drew Brown has had some injury issues and not been able to stay healthy. Did he feel that this was not only financially a bit better for him, but an opportunity to perhaps get some more starts and get some more reps and show what he could do for the next contract should he continue to keep playing?
Well, the other coach that he had a tremendous amount of familiarity with was Ryan Dinwiddie. And of course, Dinwiddie was in Calgary with him when he had his breakout years. He was quarterbacks coach at that time. Knowing him and knowing what he could work out with Dinwiddie in terms of where his projections could be, if you're the Red Blacks, you're probably pretty happy with the situation. Drew Brown, I've been following on Twitter and Instagram, and he's been working out every day. He's wanting to be the man in Ottawa. If he's protected and healthy, Jake Maier is not going to be any further ahead in Ottawa than he was in Saskatchewan. Just gets paid more not to do it. Of course, it begs the question, is Ryan Dinwiddie not? Is he not completely inured to Drew Brown?
That's a great question as well. He's inheriting Drew Brown as his number one quarterback. As you said, he's got that relationship with Jake Maier from the Calgary Stampeders run and feels comfortable bringing him on. He is the general manager as well as the head coach in Ottawa, let's not forget. So he is ultimately making a lot of these player decisions. It could be a very competitive training camp. Maier is due to make more money substantially if he does step on the field. There are some playing incentives in there as well. So it's not just the $35,000 in contract money, but it's set up to pay him successfully should he step on into a starting role.
It's $200,000 base salary, then $75,000 of that is a signing bonus. But you're talking about what is available to him: $54,000 more in playtime incentives, $9,000 more if the stats and there's provides him with awards bonuses. In other words, if he throws for so many touchdowns, throws so many completions, plays so many minutes, and that could be a $263,000 maximum contract for his 1 year deal that he signed in Ottawa. Darnell Sankey, he was first almost to the gate when free agency started, when the Montreal Alouettes decided that they were going to part ways with him. And one thing that I always wondered about this, there was a bit of a book on Sankey when he was with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, is that he was very coachable, but he wouldn't necessarily follow the play. He ad-libbed a little bit on the field, which if you're good enough, but some coaches get annoyed by that. I wonder if Montreal, who have a very strong system, decided that he needed to move elsewhere so they could bring somebody else that we could mold into this.
That's some interesting comments there. And I think the BC Lions are thrilled that the Montreal Alouettes parted ways with Darnell Sankey. And you talk about creative defenses. I think the Lions have some pieces on that defense that can give you some different looks, and not just from the linebackers and defensive backs, but you've got Matthew Betts on that defensive line that can be a menace moving to different positions as well. This could be a great pickup for the Lions defense.
Sankey is saying, this defense helped lead this team to 2 Grey Cup appearances, winning in 2023, obviously. And he was kind of musing like, well, what else was I supposed to do? What else did they want from me? There's him and Wynton McManus, like two middle linebackers that are now playing for different teams in the East. Well, one with one cat and the other in the West with another cat.
Darnell Sankey will live on in the lore of the Montreal Alouettes for years to come based on what he did in 2023. He came into that room and told the team that they weren't losing anymore, led by example, and turned that franchise around. They won the Grey Cup in an upset in 2023. He can hang his laurels on that, and I think a lot of his reputation was built around that run. And it is surprising to see the Alouettes choose 2 years later to move on from that.
Well, they've had precedent for this too, because remember Enoch Mwamba, who was their poster player. He was the one that brought out the new uniforms. He was the one that was in front of all of their ticket sales. And he was gone at the end of that season, then going to Toronto and leading them to a Grey Cup. They've had trouble hanging on to or deciding who is going to be their middle linebacker to help run that defense. They seem to have had some very powerful personalities back there, and it hasn't always been to their liking, and they move on and try again.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.
'61 Grey Cup, the first overtime in Grey Cup history. Final score: Winnipeg 21, Hamilton 14.
Bud Grant and Jim Trimble, the two respective coaches, have just left the field after conferring with referee Paul Dojak about the overtime. What happens is a 10-minute rest for each team in the dressing room. They return to play a 20-minute game, 10 minutes each way with no rest in between those small halves. If the score is still tied, at the end of that time, there is a 5-minute rest for each team, but they cannot leave the field. And then they play another 20-minute game, 10 minutes each way, and they continue that way until the game has been decided.
10, 17 and a half yards away from pay dirt. The noise has been constant for at least the last half hour. James nailed by Pete Newman immediately. And Newman just never gave him a chance. He's done that 2 or 3 times this afternoon. Jerry had no chance to pick up any speed at all.
Some great defensive line play with Newman and Barrow, 2 all-stars in that Hamilton defensive unit, coming up with the great effort from time to time. And that was definitely a real big play, Steve, for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, as Newman came bursting through.
The Bombers started to make a change, and they sent the man who came out on the field, Mike Wright, back, but the Ticats did shift. They've got Kelly in, replacing Minahan. And there are 2 flankers left, and one, the right end is split. And Flane, if he can get away, will go for it. He's into the end zone for a touchdown, and a sensational one by Kenny Flane. On that 17-and-a-half-yard gallop for a TD that has got this crowd really howling, Kenny Flane bypassed both Don Southern and Don Caraway for the TD. And so the Bombers move into a 20-14 edge with the clock showing 6 minutes and 58 seconds to go.